Hey everyone, this is the No God. I'm Chiyo Natsu, continuing our journey, charting the space between knowing and not knowing. Last time, we glimpsed the radical idea, a universe born not from substance, but from logic, from a paradoxical principle designated Anpinpyo, the spark from which the entire cycle of existence, which unified space with its hidden virtual computations and manifest physical reality, might unfold. But what is this Anpinpyo? We called it a paradox, a principle. But these are just words, pointers towards something potentially far stranger, far more fundamental than our usual categories allow. To truly grasp the GSISOM framework, we must dare to look deeper into this source. We must try to understand the nature of the paradox itself. How can zero hold infinite potential? How can contradiction be creative? Let's dive into the heart of Anpinpyo. GSISOM claims Anpinpyo is prior to everything space-time, even the model describing it. But what does prior truly mean here? It's crucial to understand. This isn't about temporal sequence. It's not suggesting Anpinpyo existed before the Big Bang in some linear timeline. Time itself, in this view, is an emergent property, bonding initiated by Anpinpyo. So, e prior to signifies logical precedence, foundational necessity. Anpinpyo is the logical root from which all else is derived, just as the axioms of geometry are logically prior to the theorems derived from them. Anpinpyo is the fundamental assumption, the ontological axiom, upon which the possibility of reality rests. Remember virtual space of VSS, the computational substrate. It too is logically prior to physical space, PSS. VS doesn't exist before PS in time. Rather, the ongoing computationality within VS is the necessary condition for PS to exist at all. And Anpinpyo is even prior to VS. It's the principle that allows VS itself to come into being and operate. This concept challenges our intuitive, time-bound thinking. We must shift from Y, from sequence to grounding. Anpinpyo is the ultimate because behind existence, a prior that transcends time itself. At the very heart of purity, Anpinpyo lies its most challenging and generative aspect, symbolized as Anpinpyo and Anpinpyo. This looks like a direct violation of the law of identity, aka the bedrock of classical logic. What can it possibly mean? Firstly, it signifies irreducibility, and Anpinpyo cannot be reduced to anything simpler. It is the foundation. It cannot be fully explained by equated to any concept or entity other than itself in its paradoxical wholeness. Trying to say Anpinpyo is X inevitably fails because would be an emergent concept derived from it. In this sense, to any simplified description, including potentially Anpinpyo itself used as a static label. Secondly, and more dynamically, it signifies inherent internal difference. Even in its foundational state before manifestation, is not absolutely uniform or static. The paradoxical coexistence of static Zora, absolute simplicity, and dynamic and infinite potential creates an internal tension, a latent difference within the unity. It's like a perfectly balanced scale holding infinite weight 8 on both sides. The balance is profound, but the potential for tipping for difference is immense. This inherent difference is crucial. It's the seed of all subsequent diversity. It's the reason the virtual space, physical space distinction can emerge. If the foundation were absolutely identical to itself in every respect, with no internal tension or potential for difference, how could differentiation ever begin? Most importantly, i.e. Anpinpyo is the principle of creation from paradox. As we saw in Module 1, paradox isn't necessarily an error, it can be the engine. This non-identity principle is that engine. The foundation cannot remain static because its paradoxical nature compels us to become other than itself. D is the very spark of Genesis, the logical necessity driving potentiality towards actuality. So, the foundation holds this paradoxical tension, this drive towards non-identity. But how does the first actual differentiation, thus breaking symmetry, occur? GSISOM proposes a mechanism self-reference. Imagine the principle somehow observing or interacting with its own paradoxical state. This isn't consciousness in our sense, but a fundamental logical operation. The act of self-reference, applied to a state that is inherently non-self, identical AN, forces a distinction. The principle, seeing its own internal tension perhaps causes that tension to resolve into the first actual difference. This initial self-reference is what kickstarts the internal inequality mentioned in our logic chain. It's the origin of all non-uniformity in the universe. Before this there was only potential ditch affair. After reference there is actual albeit minimal difference. This difference creates the first gradient, the first imbalance. Crucially, this means that inequality, difference, and non-uniformity are not accidental flaws in the cosmos, but fundamental necessities arising directly from the nature of the origin and the act of self-reference. They are the prerequisites for any structure, any information flow, any self-organization to occur. A perfectly uniform universe, born from a perfectly self-identical source, would likely remain forever inert. This talk of Ampere preceding space and virtual space being pre-geometric might seem confusing. What space are we even talking about? GSISOM uses space in a very broad, almost metaphorical sense when discussing the foundation. The unified space, a US, isn't primarily about geometric extension, but about the logical and Pujaho landscape within Champigura operates and unfolds. Think of it as the possibility space defined by the Punja principle. Virtual space, EVS, represents the inner workings, computational logical dimension of this possibility space, where the fundamental dynamics and self-organization happen. Physical space, CPS, represents a specific, structured, emergent surface or projection of this possibility space that becomes manifest and observable to entities like us born from within that projection. So, when we say an is prior to space, we mean it defines the very possibility space itself. When we say VS is pre-geometric, we mean the fundamental computations don't necessarily are the rules of our familiar 3D geometry. Unified space encompasses both the hidden potentials VS and the manifest structures PS as an inseparable whole. The total stage defined and generated by NP. This brings us back to the core paradox NP. How can a period representing absolute simplicity, zero actual information, coexist with representing infinite potential, the absolute potential and the capacity to generate everything? GSISOM resolves this apparent contradiction through the concept of potentiality vs actuality. Penn describes the state of actuality dilated in its ground state before self-reference and emergence. The system possesses zero actualized structure or information. It is perfectly simple, perfectly empty of realized form. This is the static Zo aspect. And linked to absolute potential describes a state of potentiality. Simultaneously, this state of absolute simplicity holds within it the infinite potential for all possible structures, information, and complexities to arise. It's not inert nothingness, but pregnant void containing the seeds of everything. This is the dynamic Zo aspect, the drive inherent in the ear. The paradox is precisely this unity. Absolute simplicity in actuality coexists with infinite richness in potentiality. Zero information manifests. Infinitely it's like an infinitely dense point containing the blueprint for the entire cosmos. This is why the notation Penka is often paired with absolute potential. Zero actual bits, infinite potential bits. Zero structure, infinite possibility for structure. This paradoxical unity is the ultimate source of the universe's creativity. The emptiness provides the boundless freedom for creation, while the potential provides the ceaseless drive to create. It's from this fertile tension between zero and infinity, held together in the singular principle and Piator, that the entire dynamic, complex reality we inhabit is proposed to unfold. In this module, we've journeyed into the conceptual core of GSISOM, the paradoxical principle, and we've understood its precedence not in time but in logic. We've explored the meaning of its inherent non-identity and as the engine of creation, arising from the tension between absolute simplicity, ati, static Zo, and infinite potential Zo, dynamic Zo. We've seen how self-reference might trigger the first differentiation, birthing inequality from uniformity. We've clarified the concept of a unified space as the total stage, encompassing both the hidden virtual and manifest physical. And we've grasped the core paradox, zero actuality holding infinite potentiality. Empty God is not just a starting point, It's the enduring foundation, the paradoxical heartbeat echoing through all levels of reality. Its nature dictates the fundamental operational principles of the universe. In our next module, we will explore these operational principles directly. We will examine the 7 intrinsic features that GSISOM proposes arise necessarily from Ampin's unfolding within unified space, the specific laws or characteristics that shape the fabric of our cosmos. That from inequality driving to the computational nature of reality itself, the paradox deepens, the questions multiply. That is the sign we are on the right path. Until next time, keep charting the space.